Hi, welcome back to Serging Tip Clips. Today we're going to cover a topic that I talked about in a previous tip clip a few years back, but there always seems to be a little bit of confusion about it, and that's how to get an accurate seam allowance on your serger. I think it's because of the cutting mechanism in sergers that people just aren't clear about where to put the edge of their fabric for, say, a 5/8, half-inch, 3/8 inch seam allowance. So I'd like to clear that up, and we're going to look at it with both a 4-thread overlock with the left and right overlock needles in, as well as a 3-thread narrow with just the right needle. But let's go to the table and look at both of the seams and talk about that a little bit first, and then we'll go to the machine. Here are two different seams that are stitched. This one has a 4-thread overlock stitch with my left needle and right needle. This one is a 3-thread narrow with just my right needle in. And I want to I've drawn on some different seam allowances, and I hope this clarifies the whole dilemma of where to place your fabric for these various ones. This one is a line drawn 5/8 of an inch from my raw edge. Now, if I were lining up my needle on that 5/8 inch line, it really doesn't matter what my cutting width is. I'm going to trim this away, and you can kind of see it shadowing through a little bit here. But as long as this left needle is following this drawn line on 5/8 of an inch, that's all that matters, if that's what the designated seam allowance is on my pattern. Let me just flip this around really quickly. Here's the same idea with a half-inch seam allowance. If I have my left needle lined up just at that half-inch mark, again, I may trim off a different amount on the edge depending on what my cutting width is set at. But as long as I'm following along a half-inch from the raw edge, that's really all that matters. Here is the same idea with just the right overlock needle in. Again, if I line up my right needle with the designated seam allowance line at 5/8 and stitch down, you can see I'm cutting off more of the fabric. But again, my seam allowance is being honored because my needle is following right along 5/8 of an inch from the raw edge. And let's just look at this quickly. Oftentimes, I'll use this on seam allowances on knits that have a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So here's a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Here's that 3-thread narrow stitch to go along with it. Again, I'm lining up. Now you can see considerably less is being cut off the edge, but if my needle is following 3/8 of an inch from the raw edge, and that's the designated seam allowance, it's perfect. One of my best tips for an accurate seam allowance is don't watch the needles. They know what to do all by themselves. I'm going to show you a half-inch seam allowance first using a 4-thread overlock. The indicator ridges on the toe of the foot, this one is for the left overlock needle, this one is for the right. The left overlock needle is the one that's going to form the seam, so that's the one that you want this indicator ridge to follow. And the right needle thread is there for reinforcement on this stitch. So what I'm going to do is slip my fabric under the presser foot and line up my guideline with that left overlock needle indicator ridge. So let me get this in under and bring it up just a little bit. It doesn't matter what your cutting width is as long as you've got that indicator ridge the exact amount from the raw edge as the seam allowance designates. Now, you can see to the right of my raw edge, I just have a little bit of a margin on the bed of the machine that I can see. if I didn't have a seam guide, I could use that visually to make sure that I follow that same amount from the edge, that it stays consistent with that, and that seam allowance will be straight and even. But this machine has this nifty little seam guide, and I'm going to snap this on and show you that I can slide this over and line that right up with the edge of the fabric. And I'll know that it's not going to wander to the right, and as long as I keep my hands on it, it's not going to wander to the left either. So this will give me a nice accurate seam allowance. So, and again, if you're doing any kind of garment sewing, or one piece has to fit into another on your pattern, which typically it would, make sure that everything is cut accurately on garments. Make sure it fits, because once you trim off some of that seam allowance, it's gone forever. So that's my other little tip. So let's keep an eye on this, and I'm going to go down, do this 1/2 inch seam allowance, and you'll see how easy it is to use those little indicator ridges. Let's cut this fabric, or cut the threads, and take a look. And you can see it's right on the line. So that's with a 4-thread overlock. Here's my left needle thread. My right needle thread is right above my nail. So that is with a cutting width of 8. But again, your cutting width isn't as critical. It's a matter of where you place the needles. Next, I'll show you stitching the seam allowance with a 3-thread narrow stitch. And now I just have in my right overlock needle. So this is the only indicator ridge that I need to pay attention to, and that I will line up my 1/2 inch line with. So let me get that under the foot. Make sure it's aligned with that correctly. And I'm going to slide my wonderful seam guide over just a little bit, and let's stitch this with a 3-thread narrow overlock stitch. Cut the thread, and let's take a look. Here it is. So you just see the one needle line, and it's right on the line that I drew, which is absolutely perfect. So it's a very accurate seam allowance. Thanks for joining me today. And as always, leave your comments and questions below. I'll get back to you quickly, or you can email me, gail@gailpatrice.com. And if you haven't subscribed, I'd appreciate it if you do that. Thanks very much, and we'll see you again soon. Happy sewing and serging.